Hi everyone, welcome to Casual Watch Reviews. A bit of a different upload for me this week. You might have already seen this if you tune into our Sunday social live streams at 4:30 p.m. Eastern. Last week we covered the Speedmaster and there was a lot of knowledge shared on that live stream, as with all of the live streams. If you want to hear a great show that is packed full of watch experts, I'm not including myself in that, then I highly recommend that you hit subscribe so you know when the next live stream is coming up. As we were talking about the Speedmasters, we got into the history of the Speedmaster, and Dave, who joins us from Scottish Watches, gave the best explanation of how and why the Omega Speedmaster became that iconic moonwatch. If you think you know the story about how the Speedmaster was selected, this is one of the best explanations that I've ever heard. So let's cut straight to that section of the live stream and then let me know in the comment section afterwards what you think. And if you're new to the channel, I'd love it if you liked and subscribed. Speedmaster originally was a racing watch, wasn't it? I think it was for Italian racing. First watch to ever have a tachymeter bezel on there. It got into NASA's hands. Omega, a whole bunch of watches were being tested, weren't they? And it just so happened that the Speedmaster was flying colours while the other watches sort of fell apart.
Be higher and the Daytona and all sorts of other watches.
Yeah, I think Longines might have had one in there as well. Hadn't Omega sent it there because they'd seen Ed White had worn his own?
It was Omega USA. It wasn't Omega, the mothership. It was only later. Oh, sorry, Dave. Our true Omega historian.
Let's just say there's a lot of narrative around this topic, but the reality, I was really lucky a few years ago to go to a panel with Jim Reagan, who was the guy at NASA who decided which watches were selected for man-moon space program. And the reality of it is because they are a government department, they aren't allowed to be swayed by commercial interests. And quite literally, he got sent out to buy a range of watches from a jeweller's that he felt would best suit the needed purposes of the program. And he bought, I think from memory, 7 or 8 watches from some well-known brands. He bought a Rolex, he bought a Speedmaster from Omega, he bought a variety of, I think he bought a Longines, a variety of other watches as well, and then proceeded to put them through a program of destruction, for want of a better phrase, to see which ones would fare under the expected conditions that were going to be seen. Freezing cold temperatures for things like, capsule moonwalks, all of these different things like that. And he was pretty honest and open about it. And he said the reality is that the Speedmaster was the one that broke the least. The tests were put to ultra extremes because, as he said, if an astronaut was to face some of these extremes, the reality is they would probably have much bigger problems than worrying about what condition their watch was in. The theory in those days was test it to the point where do the worst you can do to it, and if it still can do some of what it was designed to do, then it might be okay. And the reality was that was why the Speedmaster was chosen. They tested multiple iterations of watches and they did multiple tests, and it was the one that fared the best out of all of them, which then resulted in an order being placed by NASA with Omega directly for a considerable number of watches, which became effectively a working set that were owned by NASA and used as effectively sign-out tools. So as they needed things, they could have a watch signed out to them for a given mission or a need, and that's where it came about. So this whole story, to be fair, if you look at Omega's history of it, they don't explicitly say we did X, Y, and Z. And more over the last couple of years, they're becoming more honest about the fact that the very genesis of it was that they were one of the batch of watches that got picked. Just so happened that they did well in it in terms of, or did better than everyone else. So that's kind of the reality as I know it. And I guess from the horse's mouth is the best place to hear it from.
Does anybody know how many watches they actually ordered and then went to the moon or left low Earth orbit? Let's be more specific. Because I'm sure
not off the top of my head, but I do have the papers. Yeah, well, multiple times. I have documents. We went to an event, when would that be? 2018, 2019, I think it was, where some historians had been allowed into Omega's archives and also into NASA archives and managed to find a load of the original purchase orders of how many they bought, when they were bought, what models they were, when they were delivered, all of these kind of pieces of information. And yeah, they very much were signed in, signed out. They would be used, they would come back, they would get signed back into stores effectively, and quite often they were then shipped off immediately back to Omega to be fully overhauled and serviced, and then they would go back into the pool. So at any one time, some were being serviced and some were being utilised and some were in stores, and they had enough that they could kind of cycle them round. So it was a fair number. From memory, it was in 50 odd units, something like that. So it was quite a lot.
Dave, do you have any idea how many examples of each watch NASA bought for that trial?
Again, not off the top of my head. From memory, what they did was I think they initially bought basically one of each. And, you know, one of the things I remember him very explicitly saying was he said the bit of the joke was that they were spending hundreds of millions, if not billions. And, you know, remember, this was back in the 50s on this program. He said it made it sound like everybody had unlimited access to cash to do what they wanted. And he said the reality was I was told, and I was penny pinched the whole way, spend as little as you can because, you know, this was not seen as particularly important. And he was doing everything on a budget. And he said it was basically my department was me. I was the guy that had to go down to the shop, buy the watches, go bring them back, hand the receipt in, get all that done through the paperwork and the books, and then go and do the testing on them. And I didn't have the money to just, you know, kind of do it. And he said we bought production watches because we didn't have the budget to go to a brand and ask them to make something for us.
There's an interesting question in that. Has the fate of a watch company ever hung so heavily upon the weight of a single example of that watch?
Right.
If that individual serial number had been a dud, Omega as we know it today might not exist.
I guess there is that chance, you know, if a other brand or other watch had done better or even fractionally better, and or if the one that tested, as you say, had just not been it had been a Friday watch, who knows?
Yeah.
Revisionist history in play, you know, could have gone very differently in those days as well. It's not like now where you've got kind of vertically integrated manufacturing and you've got all of these kind of bespoke and kind of in-house technologies. That watch, along with probably a multitude of the others that were tested, various components, screws, main plates, hairsprings, you know, all of these parts probably came from the same cottage industry that was making those parts to supply to the broader Swiss watch trade. Because, you know, this was before the quartz crisis. This was before the kind of these big super groups that we know of today existed. They were still all relatively small brands in the grand scheme of things. Even Rolex back in the day, it wasn't anything like the Rolex we know now. So, you know, it's just a luck or happenstance, if you want to put it that way, you know, that watch happened to be the one that got picked.